There will be no permanent solution to the race problem until oppressed men develop the capacity to love their enemies. The darkness of racial injustice will be dispelled only by the light of forgiving love. For more than 3 centuries, American Negroes have been battered by the iron rod of oppression, frustrated by day and bewildered by night by unbearable injustice, and burdened with the ugly weight of discrimination. Forced to live with these shameful conditions, we are tempted to become bitter and to retaliate with a corresponding hate. But if this happens, the new order we seek will be little more than a duplicate of the old order. We must, in strength and humility, meet hate with love.
As part of Black History Month, I have been reading a lot of books by African American authors. And the books that have really been standing out to me all have this one theme in common. It's this idea of going about social movements with a love ethic in mind. In the first essay of Race Matters, Dr. West talks about the nihilism within the Black community. He says, "The proper starting point for the crucial debate about the prospects for Black America is an examination of the nihilism that increasingly pervades Black communities. Nihilism is to be understood here not as a philosophic doctrine that there are no rational grounds for legitimate standards or authority. It is, far more, the lived experience of coping with a life of horrifying meaninglessness, hopelessness, and, most important, lovelessness. The frightening result is a numbing detachment from others and a self-destructive disposition toward the world. Life without meaning, hope, and love breeds a cold-hearted, mean-spirited outlook that destroys both the individual and others." In other words, Cornel West is saying, the major issue within the Black community is this nihilistic view of life, going about life with no hope, no love, and no meaning. The question then is, what can be done about this issue? West goes on to say, "Nihilism is not overcome by arguments or analyses. It is tamed by love and care. Any disease of the soul must be conquered by a turning of one's soul. This turning is done through one's own affirmation of one's worth, an affirmation fueled by the concern of others. A love ethic must be at the center of a politics of conversion." A similar concept is talked about by Bell Hooks in her book All About Love. In one of the chapters of All About Love, Bell Hooks specifically talks about the need for a love ethic within social movements. Hooks states, "When love is present, the desire to dominate and exercise power cannot rule the day. All the great social movements for freedom and justice in our society have promoted a love ethic." In order to better understand the need for a love ethic in social movements, one just has to look at the writings of the legendary late great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In his book, Strength to Love, Dr. King talks at length at the need for a love ethic in our social movements. He speaks of several reasons as to why love is necessary. One reason he mentions is that hatred doesn't drive out hatred, only love can do so. He talks about the fact that hatred tears down, whereas love is what builds up. He also talks about the lasting impact of hatred on the person themselves. He says that hatred scars the soul and distorts the personality. And for the third reason, he mentions a quote by the legendary Abraham Lincoln. In one instance during the Civil War, Lincoln spoke positively about those in the South, and one bystander asked him how he could do so. In response, Lincoln said, "Madam, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" Now that we understand the need for a love ethic, how do we actually go about having a love ethic in our social movements? This is addressed in detail in Chapter 5 of Strength to Love. First, Dr. King talks about the need to learn how to forgive. He says that without the power to forgive, we will not have the power to love. Forgiveness does not mean that we forget what has been done or that we put a false label on an evil act. Rather, forgiveness means that the evil act no longer is a barrier towards a relationship. So, as part of a social movement, those of us who are oppressed need to learn how to forgive our oppressors. This is obviously much easier said than done, but it's a critical element required in order to have a love ethic in a social movement. A second aspect of learning how to love is seeing the good in everyone. King talks in detail that in order to love, we need to understand that there is good in every single person. Even someone who consistently does evil acts still has an element of good within them. Dr. King states, Each of us is something of a schizophrenic personality, tragically divided against ourselves. A persistent civil war rages within all of our lives. Something within us causes us to lament with Ovid, the Latin poet, "I see and approve the better things, but follow worse," or to agree with Plato, that human personality is like a charioteer having two headstrong horses, each wanting to go in different directions. I remember when reading the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle talks about this idea that within our soul, there's something else that's there, something other than reason that opposes reason and works against it. King further states, "When we look beneath the surface, beneath the impulse evil deed, we see within our enemy neighbor a measure of goodness and know that the viciousness and evilness of his acts are not quite representative of all that he is. We see him in a new light. We recognize that his hate grows out of fear, pride, ignorance, prejudice, and misunderstanding." Part of this involves understanding humankind's intellectual and spiritual blindness. A prime example is the killing of Socrates. Socrates was put to death by people who genuinely thought that he was an atheist. In reality, Socrates wasn't an atheist, but his understanding of God had a philosophical depth that exceeded the traditional conceptions of God at that time. For this reason, Socrates was put to death, for being blasphemous, but in reality, that wasn't the case. King goes on to say that there are some people who genuinely believe that war is what is needed in order to fix some of the world's problems. These are not evil people, they are just wholeheartedly misguided. Understanding that a lot of people's actions are misguided helps us to be able to forgive them, because they know not what they do. I want to end with another quote from Dr. King's Strength to Love. "My friends, we have followed the so-called practical way for too long a time now, and it has led inexorably to deeper confusion and chaos. Time is cluttered with the wreckage of communities which surrendered to hatred and violence. For the salvation of our nation and the salvation of mankind, we must follow another way. This does not mean that we abandon our righteous efforts. With every ounce of our energy, we must continue to rid this nation of the incubus of segregation. But we shall not in the process relinquish our privilege and our obligation to love. While abhorring segregation, we shall love the segregationist. This is the only way to create the beloved community." This idea of loving one's oppressors and having a love ethic is definitely very difficult. I'm not going to pretend that this is easy, but I think for myself, especially seeing everything that's been going on in Gaza and the plight of the Palestinians, it's very easy to feel very hopeless and helpless. And this idea of learning to love, loving one's oppressors wholeheartedly, just feels like the only path forward. Without it, it's just going to be a never-ending oppression of one person over another. It's just a cycle that continues, and it feels like the way to break the cycle is by living with a love ethic and bringing love into our social movements. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments if anyone has any thoughts or ideas, any other books that they would recommend. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and hopefully then this message and idea can be spread to more people. I'm currently undertaking a journey of re-education and decolonizing my mind, and as I learn new things, I make videos about them. So if you want to come along on this journey with me, feel free to subscribe to my channel and join along. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of the love and support, and I will see you in the next one.